All right, so this week's, that the person was waiting for us to record, now they're coming in. The Torah portion for this week is Kedoshim. What can we say about this Torah portion? To be holy.
What page? Page.
Hey, we're not going to look at the Torah portion.
Oh, okay.
I'm just
All right.
giving a little introduction.
Okay. Okay.
The Torah portion is the word Kedoshim, means holy ones. And God says to the children of Israel, the entire children of Israel. It's one of the few places in the Torah where God says to Moses, talk to the entire congregation of Israel. Usually it just says, speak to the children of Israel. So you put out your email blast. There's going to be a meeting tonight. Moses is going to be teaching a new piece of Torah. So, if some people show up, that's great. If people don't show up, that's on them. But this time God says, everybody needs to be spoken to be told, you shall be holy. You must try to be holy because I am holy, I, God. So, and then the whole Torah portion is about, well, what does that mean? How do you live a holy life? How do you try to be holy? How do you try to bring holiness into the world? And it's, as we've noticed so many times, the Torah reading has a combination of things that we think of as really religious issues and ritual issues. Shabbat is mentioned right away. Some of the sacrificial ideas are mentioned right away. But there's also a very, very heavy emphasis on ethics, interpersonal relations, and the famous statement, love your fellow as yourself, love your neighbor as yourself. So, and this is part of holiness. So the Torah's basic teaching that there's no separation between religion and non-religion. It's all part, living a good life, a life of goodness is what it means to be holy, and looking out for the other person and not just thinking about yourself is of the essence of holiness. So this is our commandment. And then, of course, we have, and as I said, we have so many different rules and regulations, honoring your parents, keeping Shabbat, as I mentioned, a lot of other, loving the stranger, not just your neighbor that you know so well and that you've been sharing the neighborhood with for the last generation, but strangers as well. Love them as you love yourself. Remember that you went out of Egypt and you were a stranger also. So a lot of stuff that's central to what it means to be a decent human being. And like I said, the Torah emphasizes the connection. You can't be holy if you're not decent. If you're decent, then you're already, 99% of the way there to being holy, or to striving to be holy. Whether you can actually be holy is, it's a little bit like, a horizon. You keep walking toward the horizon, but the horizon keeps on, staying, in front of you. There's no such thing as attaining a state of holiness that, is now, guaranteed for you and you've got it. You've won your certificate of holiness. There's no such thing. So that's the Torah reading. And what we're doing, as we always do, is that we are looking at the prophetic reading. What does the tradition choose from the prophets as what we would read, call the Haftarah, right? The concluding reading. The Haftarah means the concluding reading, which is chosen from the prophets. So there are different customs, different traditions. The Ashkenazim have one tradition, the Sephardim have another tradition. We're going to look at the Ashkenazi choice. That's our usual tradition that we follow. It's not a long Haftorah. It's found now, finally, to answer Natalie's question. Page 706 in the Eitz Chaim Chumash. This is the prophet Amos, chapter 9, verse 7. That's where it begins. And these are the last verses of the book of Amos. These are the 9th chapter is the last chapter, and starting from the middle of that chapter, going to the end of the chapter is what the Haftorah's the choice for the Haftorah was. Amos is pretty much the first prophet, the earliest prophet. He's around the time of Isaiah, maybe a little earlier, a little bit earlier. And he's living approximately 750 BCE and even earlier. So that's a long time ago, right? That's almost 2,800 years ago. He's a simple man. He's not part of the aristocracy. He gets into trouble for saying words of truth from God. And the whole book is continuous harangues against the corruption of the Jewish people. And he's based in the north. He's based in, with the 10 tribes that split away from Judah. And he's prophesying about a generation before the 10 tribes are destroyed and dispersed and disappear because of the Assyrian invasion and conquest. So he's there, and he sort of feels, the edginess of the time. So this is now, as I said, the end of his book, and we'll see that he sort of finally gets to a place of saying something positive. But not in the same way that we have consolation haftorahs from some of the other prophets. Okay, so, and of course our job is also to see, why is this haftorah chosen for Kedoshim? One more point, and that is that Kedoshim is often read together with last week's Torah reading, Acharei Mot. So then there are different possibilities also. So if you see the Haftorah for Acharei Mot and Kedoshim is what's called Haftorah number 2. And then there's even a Haftorah number 3, which is the Haftorah for Kedoshim alone for the Sfardim. And when the Ashkenazim, it says like this: when Acharei Mot and Kedoshim are read separately and no occasions coincide, then that have a special Haftorah, right? See below. Some traditions recite this Haftorah. Okay, when Acharei Mot and Kedoshim are combined, then recite this Haftorah. When Acharei Mot is read separately on Shabbat Hagadol, etc. So there's like this whole rigmarole of what are the various possible Haftorahs that you read for this Torah portion. But this is the Ashkenazi custom for reading when we have Kedoshim on the Shabbat. Who's going to read for us?
I'll read if you
Okay,
want.
thank you.
Okay. So we didn't read it last week because it was Rosh Chodesh.
Last week was Machar Chodesh,
Right.
and last week was Acharei Mot only.
Right. Okay.
So if it would have been Acharei Mot only, then we would have had an Acharei Mot possible reading or not. Anyway, here we are. We're reading it today.
Okay. So we're on 706, right?
Correct.
Okay. To me, O Israelites, you are just like the Ethiopians, declares the Lord. True, I brought Israel up from the land of Egypt, but also the Philistines from Kaftor and the Arameans from Kir.
Okay. So this is the opening sentence of the Haftarah. The translation doesn't quite give the Hebrew echoing. The word hello, which is like, isn't it so? Right. So that's the first word of the Haftarah, and it repeats in this verse. So in the second time, the translation goes true, but it goes hello kivnei chushiyim atem livnei Yisrael nu Hashem. Hello at Yisrael ha'eleti. So isn't it so? Isn't it so? is it not so that the following is true? Okay, so what is it that, and of course that's a rhetorical point, meaning, of course it's true. We all know that this is true. So what's the truth? What is God saying about the children of Israel? Yeah, Jen.
I don't really know, because I would have said I wouldn't mind being compared to an Ethiopian. I mean, cool country, great history. I'm not sure exactly. I mean, maybe I don't have the ancient context to know why that sounds like he's leading up to it being a bad thing.
Well, let's look at the second half of the verse. Besides the Ethiopians, who else is mentioned?
The Philistines and the Arameans. Is
Right.
it saying that is God saying that he brought the Philistines from Captor and God brought the Arameans from Ker?
Right. He says, I took you out of Egypt, which is such a big deal for us, right? And now God is saying, well, guess what?
I rescued these other
I
people.
take care of every people that there is. And when we have three examples in this verse, you know what you're like for me, Israel? You're like my beloved Ethiopians. You know how I've treated you, Israel? I've treated you the way that I treated the Philistines, where I took them out of their place that wasn't theirs and gave them a place that was theirs. And you know who you're like for me? You're just like the Arameans. I did that too with them. So this is in a very, impressive kind of, rhetorical conceit, right? What Amos, well, let me ask you. So what's the point of saying that? What is Amos trying to say when Amos says these things? And he says, hey, and this is indisputable. Isn't it so? Come on, everybody knows this. This is not fake history. And this is not something that anybody here in his audience could possibly dispute. So what is he trying to say to his audience?
He sounds lovely and pluralist and universalist. God is looking out for all of us. I don't know if that would be disliked by some of his audience, but it sounds all good to me.
Right. So I think that if we look around today and we make an assumption, which is not an outlandish assumption, which is that human nature hasn't really changed over the last 3,000 years, then we can make the following assumption, which is that there are plenty of people who wouldn't like to be told this. Right?
Wouldn't what?
Who would not like to be told this message by Amos.
Oh,
And in fact, when we, observe our traditions, when we, read the Torah, what are we constantly amazed about? We're amazed at how specially we've been treated by God. We're amazed that there's this history that we have of God's intervention to create us as a free people bound with a covenant to God. We're always told how unique we are and how special we are in God's eyes, right? From when God has us at Mount Sinai, God says, I want you to take this Torah, you will be a treasured people, a precious people for me, and you will be a kingdom of priests and what's the continuation of that phrase? This should roll off everybody's tongue. This is very important. God says at the introduction to giving the Torah, "V'yitem li am segula," that's a treasured people, often translated as a chosen people, right? Am segula mamlechet kohanim, a kingdom of priests, v'goy kadosh, and a holy nation.
holy.
Okay, so we are set up to embrace this wonderful sense of God's regard for us, of the special treatment that God has bestowed upon us. If not for God, we wouldn't be here, right? We would have been wiped out. We would have been slaves forever. Whether we just finished, Passover. Today is Yom Ha'atzmaut. Today is Israel Independence Day. We celebrate an amazing miracle that after thousands of years, we didn't give up our dream to come back to our own place, not just to be in the universe. There were plenty of Jews who just wanted to be universal. There were plenty of Jews who said, it's no big deal. Let's just be human like everybody else. But the desire for that kind of special relationship with God in a special place, and of course that special place that is selected by God for service to God, all of those kinds of special qualities have one term that is often used to describe them, and that is the word holy. Right? So Jerusalem is the holy city. Israel is the holy land. Right? The Torah is holy. So the specialness of these Jewish items, these Jewish places and buildings and objects and times, Shabbat is holy. Right? Shabbat Kodesh. We make Kiddush on Shabbat. We make Kiddush on the festivals. So holiness has in it a whole array of meanings, but part of it is this idea of specialness, this idea of uniqueness. So right at the very beginning of our Haftarah, when we ask ourselves, why was this chosen as the Haftarah for Kedoshim? As far as I know, the word holiness, Kedusha, Kodesh, holy, is not found in this Haftarah. And the first message of this first verse is a message that doesn't follow automatically from the trend of thought that people would associate with being holy. Right? We've just finished reading that Torah portion, and even when we're told, love the stranger, if we turn back to that verse, for instance, it's on page 700. If you have the Eitz Chaim Chumash, it's Leviticus chapter 19. And let's look at from 33 and 34. Natalie, do you have it?
Yes.
Okay, so how about you doing the honor for that?
The English or the Hebrew?
In the English.
When a stranger resides with you in your land, you shall not wrong him. The stranger who resides with you shall be to you as one of your citizens. You shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I, the Lord, am your God.
Okay, so here we have, as I said, I mentioned it, I made a point of mentioning it when I started to talk about the Torah portion. Here we have a very beautiful and important ethical teaching, and the stranger needs to be respected and treated as an equal, just like your own flesh and blood, just like every citizen that is part of the Jewish people, right? Even though they're not a citizen, even though they're a stranger, they're not Jewish. So, but it's also partly this idea of, you know what kind of people you should be? You should be a good, holy people. Good, holy people treat strangers nicely. You know what it means to have been a stranger in another land. So now be good. So you could see this again as part of a Jewish specialness. And many people have that idea. The Jews are good, the Goyim are bad. The Jews are moral, the Goyim are not moral. And all through Jewish history, it's been very easy for us to make comparisons of how much better we are than the peasants that we were living with. We know how to read and write. They don't. We don't get drunk. They do. all of these kinds of comparisons that always make us look good and them looking bad. Now, not everybody did this, and it's not a mitzvah to do this, right? But there's a tendency, back to the idea of human nature, every group, believe me, the peasants over there also said the same thing. Look at how strong we are, look at how, wussy they are. We can hold our liquor, they're chicken. Everybody takes whatever features they have and makes them the best things. And then everybody that doesn't have it is a loser. So this is a human thing. It's a universal trait to try to be special and particular, right? That's a universal trait. How to balance it is very tricky. So this Haftarah puts it right in our face. It puts it right in our face from the first words and says, yes, be holy, strive to be holy. Look at all these in very, very challenging and important things that you have to do to think about the other person and to treat them right, but that's not going to make you better than anybody else. Yeah, Jen.
I'm just wondering, did anyone look at this and said, oh, look, God rescued the Ethiopians, but they can still have garments that are mixing linen and wool. And God rescued the Philistines, and they don't have to separate their meat and dairy. So
exactly.
It's like, did we get chosen for special chores, basically?
Well, that's what's called, diversity in human cultures. Yeah. That would be the inference that we would draw. The inference that we would draw from this Amos sentence, this verse, this proclamation is that we have a very special way of life that we're supposed to follow. But that doesn't mean that that's the only way of life that God cares for. The fact that God cares for the Philistines and God cares for the Ethiopians and the Arameans, and by extension, every single other people in the world, and God makes different demands from those other groups, and God makes a certain demand from us. So there's a humbling that should follow from this. There's a kind of a sensitivity development that needs to be sought after. And of course, it doesn't always happen. Yeah, Geraldine.
It's like expecting more from a gifted child.
So that's an interesting way to put it, right? Where, and again, you get into this very sticky kind of situation. You want the gifted child to be everything that they can be.
Right.
And you want them to believe that they're, special and to take their gifts seriously. But on the other hand, you don't want them to become obnoxious. You don't want them to become a bully. You don't want them to become snide to anybody else. And that's this very delicate line that every human being in their own way has to walk. And certainly when it comes to teachers and people that pass on the tradition, how do you pass it on in a way that makes the next generation treasure it without thinking that everybody else's traditions are second rate or not important? And of course, the other side of the coin is, once you say everything is equal, why should I keep mine? Mine is just so hard to keep. If 90% of the people around me are doing something else and it's just as good as what I'm doing, why should I be a minority? Why should I be an outlier, an exception? And ever since modernity, that's a question that the Jewish people have been asking, and most Jews have answered, no, you shouldn't. Most Jews have answered, you're right. It's not that important.
Although a lot of Jews run away and become Buddhists, and that's actually more restrictive if you seriously practice. So I'm not sure what we're looking for is necessarily easier. Might be Jews are looking for something different.
I'm talking about a 250-year historical process. The fact that Jews in America are interested in Buddhism is a very, very recent phenomenon. It's a very interesting phenomenon. And there are different ways that people respond to the pressures of modernity, to the questions of modernity. One of the great attractions of Buddhism is that it doesn't have any of the baggage that Christianity or Islam
Well,
have.
I
For a
expect
Jew.
if they're in it long enough, or if they're like, if you were Japanese or Chinese or Korean to begin with, you'd have a whole different perspective on
But
the
that's it. But I'm
baggage.
talking
Yeah.
about Jews. I'm talking about the Jews. The Jews don't have any of that baggage. So, but the Jews have baggage with a majority Christian culture, with a majority Muslim culture, which is where Jews have mostly lived for the last 2,000 or 1,500 years or so on. And once they were able to be freed from being locked into being a part of the Jewish community, which is in the West, over the last 200 years or more, and or less, depending on where you were. But once that modernity openness happened in the Christian world, and the Christian world was falling apart too, so that you could really feel, oh wow, let me be part of this, universalist revolution. Let me be part of this idea that I just want to be a human being like everybody else. So that is a very, very strong factor in the fact that the Jewish people are much less cohesive and less involved in Judaism than ever before. And in America, they are the most secular group of all quote unquote religiously identified groups. So, that's because we took this question very seriously. And because we were a minority, we said, who needs it? And that's the onus then is on the people who love the tradition. How do you make the tradition beloved enough to choose, despite it being, an exceptional choice?
I think that's really interesting. That the two friends I have that are refugees from Haredi style Judaism did not become Reform Jews. Like they went totally secular, and
Right.
one of them told me, it's like, well, you're probably Jewish because you had 3 male rabbis at your bet din. So like they still have the same standards of like ultra orthodoxy.
Yeah,
It's just,
unfortunately, orthodoxy creates a very, very strong mindset, so that even when you break with it, you accept the Orthodox idea that it's all or nothing. And that there's a very black and white kind of way of looking at Judaism and at the world. And it's a sad, sad tragedy, because there is, an active, significant portion of the Jewish people that's working very hard to try to create an alternative, and it's not given credit. That it's the people that break away from Orthodoxy mostly just don't take it seriously, into non-Orthodox Jewish pathways, which is very sad to me. All right. So anyway, this first verse is like a bulldozer that crushes the idea that we should think of ourselves as completely better than everybody else, completely unique, and God's only child. Right? That's the force of that first sentence. And now let's see what Amos keeps on saying. So Geraldine, back to you. Verse 8, top of 707.
Behold, the Lord God has his eye upon the sinful kingdom. I will wipe it off the face of the earth. But I will not wholly wipe out the house of Jacob, declares the Lord.
Okay, so here you've got, again, like a little bit of a mixed message. On the one hand, God says, if there's a sinful kingdom, I will not tolerate it. I will not be apathetic to evil in the world. But, and here's where we get a little bit of a Jewish exceptionalism. God says, but the house of Jacob, despite the fact that you have been sinners, despite the fact that you have betrayed me, I will not completely wipe you out. So there is a little bit of a specialness here. Go ahead.
So this is why the whole point of it, that he's a prophet and God has told him, tell these people that they're not so good because they've been sinning, and I'm going to get rid of it, but I'm going to keep whoever can uphold the holiness or whatever.
Right? Or do tshuva, or return. Come
Right.
back to what I've been asking you to do all this time. Verse 9.
So he gave us the chance for that, but he didn't give the other nations the chance for that.
So that's a good question. And to a certain extent, it's not necessarily our business. Hold on a second. Something is messed up here because my computer says that it's not plugged in, but it is plugged in.
We hear you.
I know, but it's going to run out of
He doesn't
juice.
want his batteries to run out.
Yeah,
Oh.
it doesn't look like it. It's supposed. Hold on one second. Sorry.
These conversations are always awkward for me because I converted from something else. It's like hard to look down on anyone else who does.
Well, anyone else who does what?
Well, like when we're talking about, oh, it's a shame that, Jews leave. It's like, yeah, but I left what I was. So
So,
can't judge really.
well, so I brought it up, and I will say, I'll respond in these ways. First of all, I certainly respect what people choose to do. I reserve the right to say that, okay, I totally respect what you're choosing to do, but I see it as a net loss for me. So that's part of what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, you know what? Catholicism probably doesn't miss me. So
Well, yeah, because that's the numbers game. The numbers game is that we are so fragile and vulnerable, and we have so few of us that there's a certain critical mass issue. There's if you have 1 billion people, you can lose 1 million people. If you have 15 million people, losing 1 million people is a lot more significant. Losing 6 million is a lot more significant. Not replenishing them is painful. So there's a corporate, there's a collective perspective that I'm looking at. And the other thing was that I was trying to contrast before a universalist approach versus a particular approach. If a person decides that they embrace Jesus, they're Jewish and they embrace, so I personally will feel bad that they do that. I'm not going to lie. Again, it's a net loss for me, but I have to also admit that that's a religious choice. To say, you know what, I just don't want to have anything to do with Judaism because it's just a burden and it doesn't help me be a successful citizen of the world, that makes me feel angry. Because I think that it's not a contradiction. Yes, it's a contradiction. You can't be Jewish and be Christian. Choose what you want. But you can be a very successful citizen of the world and be an involved Jew. So the idea of it's the rejecting Judaism for an image of universal, sameness that I think is very attractive to Jews. Jews in modern times have not flocked to the church. They flock to secularism. That's the issue.
yeah, I actually think, well, we have a lot of Jews, so obviously people don't see those as incompatible, but a different kind of thing. But yeah, it's the pluralist and particular thing always interests me because obviously religions don't talk about the same thing or recognize the same problems. Like Jews aren't trying to be saved usually. Buddhists aren't trying to be saved. And And we talk, so universalism does have really difficult challenges. To have like a universal ideal, it doesn't really work. So,
Right,
but
and
then
again,
privileging one religion over another doesn't exactly work either. So I don't know where the workaround is there.
right. The other, again, I was talking about the Jewish experience in the West, and Buddhism is a very, very new encounter between Jews and Buddhism. That wasn't the encounter for 200 years. And part of the universalism, it's a complicated thing. We could talk about it for a long time. It would be worth, there are many, many scholarly, learned discussions about all of these things. Modern times was a time where the religious hold on civilization was cracked open. Right? That's what modernity is about. And that's actually one of the things we're struggling with right now in the United States. With Roe v. Wade, we have people who are increasingly having the power to make their agenda happen, who are harking back to a very Christian view of what is proper or not proper. And the modern breakthrough that you should have a separation of church and state, that was a revolutionary idea, literally a revolution. It was a revolution, French Revolution, American Revolution, the revolution of democracy, which created the possibility for people to be whatever they want, including nothing religiously. And that is freaking out people on the right. And their assumption is that Christian is universal. And that was a very strong message in the West throughout the emancipation. When Moses Mendelssohn was like the great breakthrough Jew who made a splash as a great philosopher, and philosophy is supposed to be universal. Reason is reason, and that's nothing to do with religion. So he was considered, the greatest philosopher until Kant came along, and they lived. He was a little older than Kant. Kant came. They were at the same time, and Kant eclipsed Mendelssohn. But Mendelssohn was challenged again and again. If you're so smart and you're such a good philosopher, why don't you convert to Christianity, which is the universal religion? So there was this whole assumption that the Christians had taken over the world. So that's what universalism was. So, which is of course a different kind of idea than, for instance, a socialist, communist, atheist idea that says universalism is about the fact that we're just all human beings, all stuck on the same planet together. And that was a revolution against religious hubris. So we've been caught in the middle, coming and going.
Well, the abortion issue is going to be especially interesting on that, because the Orthodox are already preparing for the personhood of fetuses, which is the ultimate goal on the right, because they're saying, whoa, that's halakhically not possible for us, and an abortion is sometimes halakhically necessary.
Yeah, they're in a lot of trouble because they basically sold their souls to the devil.
The Jewish version believe that there is no life until 3 days after birth, something like that, 7 days after birth.
I don't want to get into all of those rules and regulations, but abortion is absolutely, from the Jewish perspective, not murder, period.
It isn't. And
if you have a choice between aborting a fetus and saving the mother's life, you must save the mother's life. Right. The opposite position of the Catholic Church. Never go to a Catholic hospital if you're pregnant. So, but the problem with the Orthodox is they know that the Jewish perspective is totally different than what's driving the politics today. However, on 99% of all the other things, they have climbed into bed with the extreme right. The Orthodox community is a serious Trump supporting community. So they're really a little bit stuck. They've painted themselves into a very uncomfortable place. Politically, they've thrown all of their hopes and energies into being on good terms with the right wing, including the extreme right wing. And yet they know that the truth is that that in this particular issue, they really shouldn't be supporting this. So what they're going to do about it is going to be interesting to see.
Well, we'll find out if the right respects religious freedom for them.
Well, they
Well,
don't. We know
gonna
already
support
that the right doesn't. The only question is how much political counter pressure can there be? There's no question. The right does not respect everybody else's position. The only question is, are they going to be able to get away with it, or are they going to, have to back down if there's enough pressure from outrage from people, to make it too dangerous for them to do this.
I can't see how I mean, if they do this, I think that it seems to me that everybody will vote Democratic, because what woman is going to let her children and grandchildren have this? I mean, this is ridiculous.
I wish you were right.
It's going to lead to everything else. It's good. What it's going to lead to, because of the extreme right, it's not just that. They're not going to stop with that. They're going to go.
Exactly. But you know what? This has not been a mystery. And the right has, gotten stronger in terms of their political stranglehold on the country. Whether it's numbers or not doesn't matter. They're geniuses at making sure that the numbers don't count.
The gerrymandering.
Three quarters of the American public is in favor of legalized abortion. But that doesn't change. The right wing has enough control, and people, look, by the millions, voted against their own self-interest because they have this idea that the right wing is protecting goodness, America, society, morality.
No more.
There's a whole mythology about this that has been completely bought by so many people, even though it doesn't really work, in their interests. But they think that their interest is bigger than that. They think that it's too scary to think that the world will actually be a place of freedom.
The question is whether the states with big cities can forever remain in this situation. Can we forever be sending more money out to red states? Can we be supporting them financially forever and ever when they're going to make laws that we all hate? So I think the next 50 years in the United States, I'll be amazed. I don't have a crystal ball, but I would be amazed if it actually holds together as a country under the current circumstances.
What a tragedy that would be. What a tragedy.
Yeah, because I don't know how we help like Ukraine and Taiwan and other places if we're balkanized.
And how do we help all the people that are stuck in the red states that don't buy what the red states are doing?
Keep open borders in case they want to move.
These people, I mean, well, I guess anybody who wasn't an adult in 1960s doesn't know how many people died and were. I had a friend who went to Puerto Rico with her boyfriend. He paid for the abortion. They later got married, although she broke up with him because emotionally it's a very horrible thing. And she had 7 miscarriages, finally had 1 child, and was never able to have another child. And this is going to somebody supposedly, we're
probably not in wire hanger territory because there are more options today. And they might, like abortion pills and things might become illegal, but they'll probably still be available. I mean, there are more things people can do today than they could have in the 60s. So
they can't afford to go from state to state. A lot of people cannot afford to go from state to state.
I understand that. But I mean, believe me, there are already organizations who have thought this out. There are going to be more ways to get help than were available back in the day.
Let's see if we can finish up the Torah. Geraldine, back to you. Thankfully, it's a short Haftorah, so we have a chance of reading it in the next few minutes. Go ahead.
You have twins reading it, so they must have very little to read.
Thankfully.
For I will give the order and shake the house of Israel through all the nations as one shakes sand in a sieve, and not a pebble falls to the ground. All the sinners of my people shall perish by the sword, who boast, never shall the evil overtake us or come near us.
Keep going.
In that day, I will set up again the fallen booth of David. I will mend its breaches and set up its ruins anew. I will build it firm as in the days of old, so that they shall possess the rest of Edom and all the nations once attached to my name, declares the Lord, who will bring this to pass. A time is coming, declares the Lord. Wait, I'm sorry, I turned 2 pages together. When the plowman shall meet the reaper and the treader of grapes, him who holds the bag of seed, when the mountains shall drip wine and all the hills shall wave with grain, I will restore my people Israel. They shall rebuild ruined cities and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and drink their wine. They shall till gardens and eat their fruits, and I will plant them upon their soil, never more to be uprooted from the soil I have given them, said the Lord your God.
Right. So the ending image is abundance and peace and security, and the Jewish people sitting on their land and enjoying its fruits and its produce, and everything is great. But this will only be after a lot of shaking down, a lot of sifting through, so that only those people who return to God will be accepted and rewarded. And those people who have been dismissive of this whole problem will pay the price. So this is a kind of a semi-consolation, right? Because the consolation is really predicated on a very, very tough period of conflict and suffering and catastrophe. So again, what's the connection to this Haftorah, to this Torah reading? What's the Haftorah's connection to the Torah reading in anybody's own words? What's the dialogue that's happening between our Torah reading and this Haftarah?
You have to get back to trying to be holy.
Right.
You have to be a good person. You have to
It's-
stop sinning.
Right. It's like I gave it to you on a silver platter. Here's the recipe. Here are the guidelines. So I can't make it any clearer for you, but you have to now follow through. And there are consequences. Right. This is the way the prophet is trying to scare people, trying to move people, trying to inspire people. Back to, again, what the conversation we were having, this is not so much about rationalism, right? This is about emotions. Which emotional buttons can be effectively and successfully pushed? Unfortunately, in our country, the right is much better at pushing people's emotional buttons. The prophets tried to push people's emotional buttons for the sake of getting them to be more righteous, more just, more compassionate, more moral. The truth of the matter is that most of the prophets were abject failures. They didn't create a gigantic moral revolution in Israel. But somehow or other, their message was kept by the people who cared. And the message is, held on to and never given up on, even though it has never really succeeded. I think, back to Jen's point, that I don't know what the future is going to be, but it's not about betting on the future. It's about just keeping on fighting for what's right.
That's right.
And that will make the difference that it will make for whoever it will make that difference. And we don't know. We have no idea who will be helping and who will be influencing and who will take up the battle next. But if we don't do the battle now, there'll be nobody to remember what's right and what's wrong later.
Yeah.
All right. Take
Yeah,
care, everybody.
All right.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Rabbi.